I think there's something really like gratifying about, the near touch and like the near kiss and the almost this happened. And almost I think in some ways that delayed gratification is what makes like sex scenes so sexy.
Hello, this is Louise Dean, founder of the Novelry, the world's best loved school for writers, with more 5-star reviews than any other and a whole bunch of published success stories. As an award-winning Booker-listed author, I founded the Novelry to help writers avoid the frustrations of writing solo for years by getting wise eyes on the most important element of writing right from the get-go. Story, story, story. And this is our podcast to give you everything you need for happy writing. This is the Novelry on Writing.
Hi everyone, I'm Georgia Summers. I'm an editor in the SFF department at the Novelry. I'm also the #1 Sunday Times bestselling author of The City of Stardust. And I'm here today with Libby.
Hi, I'm Libby Page. I'm the author of 5 romantic novels, and I'm also a writing coach here at the Novelry.
Today we're going to give you 5 tips on how to heighten sexual tension in your novels. So Libby, I think you're going to take it away.
Yes, but I think first things first, it's worth mentioning that actually, even if you're not writing sex scenes in your novel, it's important to have sexual tension. I think some writers can be quite scared about writing sex scenes, but there are all different ways of doing it. But this idea of tension between your characters is so important in a romance to really keep us turning the pages and wanting to see whether they get together. So the first tip that we're going to talk about is physicality and forced proximity. So to me, this means all the kind of physical stuff. So really describing the character in detail, painting a picture, using all the senses so you really get a sense of them, and then forcing them to be close next to each other.
I think there's something really like gratifying about, the near touch and like the near kiss and the almost this happened. And almost I think in some ways that delayed gratification is what makes like sex scenes so sexy in the end. I keep going back to Pride and Prejudice 2005 edition with Keira Knightley, and there's a scene that everybody talks about, and it's the scene where Mr. Darcy takes Elizabeth's hand to help her into the carriage, and afterwards he has his hand flex where he flexes his hand, and it's so sexy, and it's just the touch of a bare hand. But I think that like really speaks to the power of these really sort of intimate moments, even if they're not like explicit moments.
Exactly. I think less can be more, can't it, sometimes?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I do love, like, especially when it comes to fantasy, which is, the area that I work in. I think, having like the ballroom scene where you have to dance with each other, or like, let's say you're like spying on somebody and you have to climb into a wardrobe together. Like that to me is like, yes, perfect. Especially if they don't like each other at the beginning. That's also quite nice.
And I think just it's about being aware of each other's physicality. So even say if you're going from an enemies to lovers storyline where you might actually really hate the character to begin with, you still have an awareness of, often it's like you think they're really hot even though you hate them. And it's just that, creating a mental image for the reader of their physicality, and just that sense, I think of that of, when you're just aware of where the other character is and how far away they are, and the sound of their voice and all those kind of things. I definitely would say using all the senses to create that picture can be a really good way of creating that tension.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Our next tip would be specificity. Now this is like, I would say this is my favorite word. I think
it's quite hard word to say, specificity, but it's a good one.
And it's so important. To me, I always feel like it's like, why is it these characters? Why is it this book? Why is it not them and somebody else or anybody else? And I think when you really drill down into that kind of specificity and that sort of shared connection, like what is it about them that brings it together? When we talk about books and talk about how much we love books, a lot of the time, we have all these elements that sort of really amplify our reading experience, but when we're talking about them, we talk about how much we love the characters and the characters together. So I think that like that's where specificity becomes so key to the book and so key to heightening that tension.
And I think that link to that this idea that what is sexy to one person might be different to another person, and I think it's like finding what is sexy for those specific characters. And we talk a lot about the need to really know your character as a starting point for whatever you're writing, but I think it, when you're thinking about sexual tension, it's another reminder that you really need to know them on a deeper level to know what's really going to make them tick. I think about the book Here We Go Again by Alison Cochrane, and the two main characters, there's a scene in there that I just think is a great example of sexual tension, where the two main characters, Logan and Rosemary doesn't really think of herself as a kind of sexual person. She doesn't really have this great kind of sense of self and body image, and she's quite anxious, and Logan gets her to take sexy photos, and I kind of think it's so great because it really digs into her, this idea that she doesn't think of herself in that way, and she has low self-confidence, and so the thing that really helps ease her out of that is to see herself in a different way, and that I thought was just a great example of really showing how much the two characters know each other, showing how much the writer knows that character, and then creating that tension in a way that feels really believable to those two specific characters.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. It's, I really love like that. I really think that is the kind of the good thing about specificity. The thing that works is having that sort of depth of knowledge, both from you, the reader, understanding them, but also them understanding each other.
And I guess, just making it feel not generic, which is what we're hoping for,
yes,
whatever we're writing. So really getting into the specifics of those two characters, their backstory, what makes them tick, how they feel about themselves, how they feel about each other, all of that's going to come into play when we're thinking about sexual tension. So the next tip we've got to talk about is dialogue. So this, I guess, is thinking about how, when the characters aren't even touching, how we can create this sense of tension. So I think of, that real witty banter, the sort of said and unsaid things. Some of my favourite authors for dialogue are Emily Henry and David Nichols. And I always think it's a great idea to look at books you really love, the dialogue for, and really start analysing it and taking it apart.
Oh yeah, Emily Henry just feels like the queen of like that really like almost like tennis match dialogue where they're just like hitting it back and forth, and like she doesn't stop out. Like I always feel like with dialogue sometimes you have like that call and response, but she just does not stop. It keeps going. Like there's a scene in Happy Place I think about all the time, which is when the two kind of the sort of protagonists, the love interest, are sort of in this room together, and they have this ongoing joke where he's not her friend, he's friends with somebody else in the group, and they're kind of talking about it late at night, and they're both in this like shared room together, and he sort of says like, I don't want to be your friend. And it's such like, we know exactly what he's thinking.
Exactly.
We know that he's
so
not saying
so
it feels to me like that's where that a lot of the tension goes, and like not just what's said but also what's unsaid. And sort of that really delicious like reading between the lines.
And I think so many of these points do link together. I think specificity and dialogue can go really well together, and I think as an exercise to kind of look back on a piece of dialogue, maybe from Emily Henry or another author that you really like, and think about how the conversation feels really specific to those characters, and that I think can be a really great way to show that connection between the two of them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Again, like I think another book that I've really loved that I'm sort of rereading at the moment is Little Thieves by Margaret Owen, and she has this like the two protagonists, it's a sort of thief and a prefect who's sort of intent on catching her, and they're so mean to each other, and it's so delicious, but it's because he has that specificity to it, and we know it's not just any of these two characters, it's these two characters needling at each other, and it's very cute, and it's very like, oh yes, incredibly compulsive.
And what do you think, I'm intrigued to hear what you think makes good dialogue versus not so good dialogue to read. What do you find when you're both reading and writing?
I think when everybody has their heart out on their sleeve, that can be quite difficult to to sort of be convinced by, because the truth is we never say what we're really thinking. You know, we're always sort of having those layers inside ourselves of, we're saying something, how is this person going to react to this, what do we want from this person, what are we accidentally revealing about ourselves, you know. And I think similarly when characters have you know, don't disagree on anything either, when they're just like, yes, brilliant, thank you, you know, I'm like, do you really mean that though? Yeah. Doesn't everybody have a little bit of a fight? And I think, you know, having that tension when you come into conflict, how do you resolve that conflict?
And that's quite a good point, because it maybe reveals one of our later points.
Oh, yeah, it does.
With courses, coaching and community, the Novelry is the world's top-rated writing course. You'll come up with the idea for a novel you can't wait to write, then you'll write a finished draft, and you'll edit your novel into a book that readers will love. A Big 5 publishing editor will review your novel. So, if you've got a book in you and you've never found the right time to write it, now there's a good place. Come on over to the Novelry. Beginners welcome. We'll show you how to start, coach your story into shape, and cheer you on to type the end.
Should we move on to number 4?
Yes, setting. So I think the other thing that's really important is to consider your setting and how to use it effectively. I think going back to my last sort of an earlier point about, like, you know, what is it like in the ballroom? If you're in a grand fantasy setting, like, the ballroom is the place where everybody gets really beautiful and dressed up. And I think it's kind of, you know, maybe that sense of being in an extraordinary environment allows people to sort of breach maybe or sort of bypass social niceties that they have to play by elsewhere.
I really think like the idea of thinking about how the setting can feel in some ways like another character who's kind of like pushing these two characters sometimes into even more intense situations. So I like to think things about like the weather, you know, how can you use the weather to really heighten the tension? So, you know, a sudden rainstorm that they both get soaking wet, they have to go and like run for shelter together, you know, those kind of things. I think about Emily Henry's You and Me on Vacation, where the two main characters get stuck in this like swelteringly hot apartment and the air conditioning breaks, and it's like this adds a sort of a real physical intensity to what is already a sort of emotionally intense scene. I think holidays generally can be great ways to build new opportunities for tension between your characters.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like it's that kind of extraordinary circumstance, that extraordinary situation. I mean, like another example I can think of, it is The Ministry of Time by Killian Bradley, which I loved. I think it does so many things so well, but one of the things it does really well simply by using setting is, you know, for context, it's essentially about the question, what if you could expatriate a 19th century Arctic adventurer into the present day? And, you know, he's there, he has a handler who's a woman, and they're both flatmates, so they're sharing a flat together. And, you know, of course, you know, but he's a Victorian man, you know, like, does he even see ankles? And now he has to kind of deal with that really extraordinary circumstance. And, you know, you can just feel the tension implicit in that because it's so... it, you know, it puts them in a position of tension. So yeah, just super exciting.
Yeah, thinking actually a little bit more about holidays, came to mind one of the scenes in One Day where Emma and Dexter go on holiday together to Greece, and they think they've booked 2 rooms. Going back to the forced proximity thing earlier, they thought they've booked 2 rooms. Oh no, they end up in 1 room. But also there's so many opportunities for, you know, she's in a swimsuit, they're seeing each other in less clothing, he puts sun cream on her back.
Yes.
They go out for a meal and get a bit tipsy and talk. You know, I think there's something about being on holiday that the usual rules don't apply, that I think can be a great way of bringing characters together and really forcing that sense of tension.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to move on to our final tip now, which we may have guessed from, we've kind of touched on it a little bit already, which is this idea of conflict. So I guess conflict not necessarily meaning arguments, but it could mean arguments, but just this idea of, I guess, like obstacles being in the way of the characters and how that helps heighten the tension. I think a book that really comes to mind for me when thinking about conflict and stakes and how that can heighten sexual tension is Red, White and Royal Blue.
Oh yeah.
So this idea of the Prince of England falling for the first son of America, you know, there are really kind of really real ramifications, wide-reaching political ramifications of these two people getting together. They really shouldn't be together, and that I think makes it so much hotter. That sense of they're not seeing eye to eye. There's big things at stake. What are your thoughts on conflict and creating sexual tension?
I mean, I feel like one of the nice things about things like tropes, for example, is that a lot of the tension is implicit in the kind of conflict they set up. So, for example, like I think about forbidden love. Well, there's plenty of conflict in that. Or a marriage of convenience, where people who don't maybe naturally love each other have to find a way to sort of make it work. I think about Bride by Ali Hazelwood, which is, a vampire werewolf romance, which I'm always a big fan of. And how amazing the tension is, because they're not supposed to like each other at the beginning, and then we sort of watch them sort of, maybe fall in love a little bit reluctantly. Something that I was thinking of when we talked about, before this, was sort of the one bed trope. And I've seen some people talk about on TikTok, for example, about the idea of the reverse trope. So, for example, it's not one bed, it's so many beds. And I think there's something really funny about, the inherent conflict in that, of having to go into a room and be like, oh, we're just two people and there's 20 beds in here.
What do we do?
Yeah. Do we pick beds further away? Do we get closer? Do we end up in the same bed despite having 20 beds? So I think that they sort of open yourself up to have a lot of fun with that kind of sense of conflict.
Going back to something you said earlier to do with dialogue about how, the characters can't just agree all the time. I think putting them in situations where they are really at odds is a great way to really create that tension. You kind of don't want them, because I guess what we're trying to do in a romance novel is eke it out for as long as possible. The reader hopes that they're going to end up together, but we want to keep them guessing right till the end. So I'd say conflict is a way of, really keeping the reader interested. You want to have things in there where you think, how can they overcome this? And that can really add to the tension as well.
Yeah, I think that sense of delayed gratification is just, it's that to me feels like the most exciting thing. I think that, that's why I think, marriage or getting together happens at the very end of a book, because really what we're interested in is how they get there and how they find their way there.
And I guess that's really what we're trying to do with tension, is kind of keep the novel as interesting as possible, so that the reader doesn't just go, okay, well, we know they're going to end up together. It's really eking it out for as long as possible. That to me is what's so great and so joyful about reading romance, is that real kind of will they, won't they, these two people who you really think should be together, but and they have this chemistry, but they're just not getting there just yet.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, this has been so much fun.
Yeah, it's been great to chat with you. I feel like there's so much more that we could say on this, but hopefully this has given everyone a little bit of a taster and some things to go away and think about. Thanks for speaking with me.
Alrighty. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today. We're so pleased to have you along for the writing journey, and we hope to see you on another episode of The Novelry on Writing. If you'd like to learn more, visit us at thenovelry.com. From first draft to finished manuscript, at The Novelry you'll enjoy one-to-one coaching from best-selling authors, live writing classes with award-winning authors and literary agents, and you'll work with a publishing editor all the way for submission to literary agents toward a publishing deal. All writers learn from other writers, even the greats. Write your novel in good company. Join us at The Novelry. We'll show you how to start, coax your story into shape, cheer you on to type the end.